It was funny, almost too funny. The moment was so hilarious that no one could stay in character, no matter how hard they tried. Take after take fell apart as the laughter kept ruining every shot. The studio poured thousands of dollars into trying to fix the problem, but eventually decided to bury the entire story instead. For decades, it remained hidden from the public, until Julie Andrews finally revealed the truth during a live television appearance. What really happened inside that gazebo? And why did Christopher Plummer, who openly disliked the film, agree to stay silent about it for so long? Europe's love affair with the story began quietly in the mid-1950s. In 1956, a German producer named Wolfgang Liebeniner released two films inspired by Maria von Trapp's memoir, The Story of the Trapp Family Singers. The first film, Die Trapp Family, was followed by a sequel just 1 year later. Both productions were low-budget, deeply sentimental, and unmistakably European in tone, but they resonated with audiences. In post-war West Germany, people were desperate for stories filled with warmth, comfort, and hope, and these films delivered exactly that. They became massive box office successes, eventually ranking as the most commercially successful films in West Germany at the time. The appeal of the story didn't stop there. Its charm spread rapidly across Europe and even reached audiences in South America. People from different cultures and speaking different languages connected with the image of a musical Austrian family standing up to the Nazis and choosing love over fear. However, when the films were shown to American studios, the response was far from enthusiastic. To put it kindly, Hollywood executives felt the movies resembled a high school stage production, too emotional, too corny, and far too foreign. No one was eager to bring the Von Trapp story to American screens. That changed when Vincent J. Donahue entered the picture. Donahue was not just any director, he had recently won a Tony Award and possessed a sharp instinct for emotionally powerful stories. Paramount sent him out to scout for new material, and during that search, he watched the German Trapp family films. At first, his reaction matched everyone else's. They felt clumsy and awkward. But then something unexpected clicked. Beneath the dated style and low production value, he saw something genuine. The story had depth. It had heart. Donahue made a bold declaration that no one else had dared to voice before: "You can't make this a film. You have to turn it into a Broadway musical, for Mary Martin." That single statement flipped a switch and set off a chain reaction that would eventually lead to one of the most successful musicals in history. Yet none of it would have been possible if Maria von Trapp hadn't made a very unusual, and some might say disastrous, business decision years earlier. Maria von Trapp was not a Hollywood insider. She had no agent and no lawyers protecting her interests. She was simply a woman trying to support her family. So when German filmmakers approached her in the early 1950s and asked to purchase the rights to her life story, she agreed, accepting a one-time payment of just $9,000. Even at the time, it wasn't much. Adjusted for today's money, it equals roughly $104,000. While that may sound decent for a quick deal, it was only a tiny fraction of what the story would eventually be worth. To make matters worse, Maria had unknowingly signed away far more than she realized. When Hollywood later approached her, they attempted to buy only the title of her book, hoping to avoid rights complications and create a version merely inspired by her story. But Maria refused. She stood firm, insisting that if her family's story was going to be told, it needed to be shared fully and truthfully, without cherry-picking or distortion. By the late 1950s, Mary Martin, the biggest Broadway star of her era, and her husband, Richard Halliday, were determined to bring the Von Trapp story to the stage. There was just one major obstacle: no one could find Maria von Trapp. As it turned out, she was deep in the jungles of Papua New Guinea, doing missionary work alongside Father Franz Wasner, the family's longtime musical director. There were no phones and no internet, only handwritten letters. Ironically, Maria never opened them. Every time she arrived at a new mission post, stacks of mail would be waiting, often filled with letters from an American couple eager to discuss Broadway. Without reading them, she tore them up. Literally, Maria wasn't interested in show business at all. Her life was centered on serving people in remote villages, running clinics, teaching music, and living a simple, purposeful life. Broadway was the very last thing on her mind. But then, something unexpected occurred. When Maria and Father Wasner finally returned to the United States by ship, they docked in San Francisco. Waiting for them at the pier was none other than Richard Halliday. He handed Maria 2 tickets to see his wife perform in Annie Get Your Gun. Maria agreed to attend, most likely out of politeness rather than genuine interest. What she witnessed on stage, however, completely amazed her. Mary Martin was charming, powerful, and magnetic. Maria was deeply moved, but she still had difficult news to share. She explained that she had already sold the film rights to the Germans years earlier, meaning that door was technically closed. Even so, she surprised the couple by offering encouragement. "You're welcome to give it your best shot," she told them. That single opportunity, one casual approval from Maria, would ultimately spark one of Broadway's greatest legends. When producers first became serious about turning Maria von Trapp's life into a stage musical, their vision was very different. The plan was to blend traditional Austrian folk songs, the same kinds of melodies the real Trapp family performed in concerts, with only a few new songs to connect the story. It was meant to be a light touch of Broadway layered over old European charm. However, when Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein were approached to write just one or two songs, the legendary duo refused to compromise. They essentially said, "Thanks, but no thanks, either we write the entire show, or we walk away." They didn't want their music clashing with old Austrian ballads. It was an all-or-nothing demand, and that moment changed everything. The producers put the project on hold. Rodgers and Hammerstein still had to complete Flower Drum Song, so the Von Trapp story was temporarily shelved. When they eventually returned to it, they rewrote the entire concept from the ground up, this time using all original songs. These weren't just any compositions, we're talking about enduring classics like My Favorite Things, Do Re Mi, Edelweiss, and Climb Every Mountain, songs the world continues to sing today. Opening night arrived on November 16, 1959. The curtain rose at the Luntfontein Theater on Broadway, with Mary Martin starring as Maria and Theodore Bickel as Captain Von Trapp. The production cost $400,000 to stage, which was a hefty budget for that era. The excitement was electric. Ticket sales surged, eventually bringing in more than $232 million in advance bookings alone, before most people had even seen the show. Mary Martin was nearly unstoppable during the run, missing only one performance the entire time. The show lasted for 1,443 performances, nearly 4 years, before closing in June 1963. But by the summer of 1960, something else was already gaining momentum, a bidding war for the movie rights. Studios recognized that this wasn't just a hit, it was a phenomenon. 20th Century Fox emerged victorious, paying $1,250,000 for the rights, equivalent to more than $13 million today. The price shocked many, especially since Fox was already in serious financial trouble. Their previous epic, Cleopatra, had nearly destroyed the studio, going $15 million over budget and damaging careers along the way. Fox was bleeding money, so when they purchased the rights to The Sound of Music, many people thought they were insane. Hidden within the contract, however, was a clever clause: if the film earned more than $12.5 million, Rodgers and Hammerstein's estate would receive 10% of the profits. Co-writer Howard Lindsay literally laughed at the idea, convinced the movie would never come close to that figure. He could not have been more wrong. This brings us to one of the biggest what-ifs in Hollywood casting history, Julie Andrews' revenge and Hollywood's costly mistake. By the early 1960s, Julie Andrews had already dominated the stage. She was adored for her role as Eliza Doolittle in My Fair Lady on Broadway. Her voice was breathtaking, and her charm undeniable. Yet when it came time to adapt My Fair Lady for film, Hollywood turned its back on her. Studio executives claimed she wasn't camera-ready, meaning they believed she lacked enough glamour for the big screen. Instead of casting the woman who made the role iconic, they chose Audrey Hepburn, a decision that shocked Broadway fans. Audrey was elegant, certainly, but she couldn't sing like Julie. In fact, most of her songs in the film had to be dubbed. Julie was devastated. She had carried My Fair Lady for years, only to be passed over at the biggest moment. It was the kind of snub that could have ended a career. But fate had other plans. Around that same time, director Robert Wise was looking for someone to play Maria von Trapp in The Sound of Music. He wasn't convinced Julie was the right fit, until someone at Disney showed him an early cut of Mary Poppins. The film wasn't even finished yet. But just a few minutes in, Wise turned to the screenwriter and said, "Let's sign her, before anyone else does." Julie was offered the role of Maria for a flat fee of $225,000. In today's money, that's about $2.28 million. It was a decent paycheck for a rising star, but here's the catch: there were no royalties, no bonuses, and no box office cut. Once she cashed that check, that was it? Meanwhile, Mary Martin, who had played Maria on stage, had negotiated a very different deal. She earned more than $8 million from her share of the Broadway profits. Fox didn't think Andrews was a big enough star to deserve a back-end deal. That decision would come back to haunt them. Because Mary Poppins turned out to be a smash hit. Julie Andrews not only proved the studio wrong, she won an Oscar for Best Actress. And when she accepted the award, she did something cheeky. She thanked Jack Warner, the very man who had rejected her for My Fair Lady. It was a sweet, subtle form of revenge, and the audience loved it. Still, The Sound of Music would become her most iconic role. And even though the film would go on to earn hundreds of millions worldwide, Julie never saw a single dollar beyond that original flat fee. And she wasn't the only one Fox tried to shortchange. The role no one wanted. While Julie Andrews was already charming everyone behind the scenes, casting her on-screen partner was turning into a serious headache. The role of Captain George Von Trapp should have been a dream gig. He was the handsome, brooding widower who slowly falls in love with Maria. But here's the thing, no major actor wanted to play him. Robert Wise, the director, tried everyone. He considered Sean Connery, who had just shaken the world as James Bond. He also reached out to Richard Burton, known for his intense performances, and his rocky relationship with Elizabeth Taylor. Even Bing Crosby was floated as a possibility. But none of them fit the tone or spirit of the film. Some said no. Others just didn't seem right. Then came Christopher Plummer. He was classically trained, elegant, and sharp. But he didn't like the script. At all. In fact, Plummer thought The Sound of Music was too sweet, too sentimental. He called it The Sound of Mucus behind the scenes and turned down the role several times. The idea of playing a strict, emotionally stiff father in a musical didn't interest him. But Robert Wise believed in him. So he flew to London to convince Plummer face-to-face. Plummer agreed, but only under one condition: he wanted to reshape the character. He told the writers the captain needed more depth, more heart, better dialogue. And most of all, he needed his own song, something to show his emotional side. That's how Edelweiss ended up in the film. It's not an Austrian folk song, like many believe. Rodgers and Hammerstein actually wrote it for Plummer's character. The idea was to give the captain a quiet, personal moment of vulnerability. Even with those changes, Plummer still struggled. He later admitted that he drank through parts of the shoot. During the filming of the family's big farewell performance to the Nazis, arguably one of the most intense scenes, Plummer was actually drunk. He said it helped him get through the stiffness of the role. Despite all the tension, his performance worked. He brought dignity and restraint to the captain, making the character's transformation, from cold disciplinarian to loving father, feel real. And audiences fell in love with it. But here's a wild twist: Christopher Plummer also had a flat contract. No royalties. No back-end deal. Just like Julie Andrews, he walked away with a set paycheck. As the film went on to gross over $286 million around the world, both stars watched from the sidelines, cheered, but did not receive beyond what was agreed on. And while the adults were dealing with contracts and rewrites, the younger cast members were about to face their own chaos. Liesl, Friedrich, and the future stars. The search for the Von Trapp children was anything but simple, and the competition was fierce. Take the role of Liesl, the oldest daughter. Believe it or not, a young Mia Farrow auditioned 3 times. She was only 20, still fresh-faced and delicate. The casting team's notes were blunt, sweet, but no spark. Not enough energy. Can't really dance. That was that. Farrow was out. Ironically, the woman who did get the part, Charmian Carr, was actually 21. Not years old. 21 years older than Farrow. Yep, Carr was cast to play 16 while already in her 20s. But she had something Farrow didn't, this confident glow and graceful charm that lit up every room. Losing out on The Sound of Music may have stung for Farrow, but it opened the door to something even bigger. Just a few years later, she'd terrify the world in Rosemary's Baby, and her Hollywood path would never be the same. As for Friedrich, the second oldest child, one of the actors who auditioned was Kurt Russell. Yes, the same Kurt Russell who would later become an action star. Patty Duke and Terry Garr also threw their names in. But in the end, the role went to Nicholas Hammond, a thoughtful, 15-year-old kid with a calm intensity the director loved. Years later, Hammond made history in a whole new way. He became the very first live-action Spider-Man on television in 1977. The rest of the Von Trapp kids? They were hand-picked after grueling auditions. The casting team searched for weeks, sometimes months, until they found just the right faces, voices, and personalities. And what they built wasn't just a cast, it was a family. Even decades later, the actors who played the children remained close. They reunited often, supported each other through life events, and kept in touch with both Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer until the very end. Their bond felt real because it was real. And the world noticed. The box office takeover. For nearly 3 decades, one film ruled Hollywood's box office like an untouchable king, Gone with the Wind. Since its release in 1939, it sat at the top, undefeated through wars, golden ages, and new technologies. Then came The Sound of Music. When it was released in 1965, no one saw this coming. But by November of 1966, just 18 months later, it had done the impossible. It dethroned Gone with the Wind, raking in an unheard of $286 million at the global box office. And here's the thing, that was not inflated modern money. That was actual earnings, based on ticket prices from the 1960s. Which makes it even more incredible. To put it another way, The Sound of Music sold 283 million tickets around the world. That's nearly 1 out of every 12 people alive at the time. People who didn't even speak English were humming Do Re Mi. In villages without electricity, folks still recognized Edelweiss. And there was no viral marketing, no online trailers, no streaming platforms. Just word of mouth, radio mentions, glowing reviews, and families going back to see it a second, third, even 10th time. It became more than a film. It became a global phenomenon. A moment in history that people shared, regardless of country, language, or age. And then came the cherry on top, the Oscars. The Sound of Music swept the Academy Awards, winning 5, Best Picture, Best Director, Best Sound, Best Editing, and Best Score. Director Robert Wise, who had already made waves with West Side Story, proved that lightning could strike twice. This wasn't just a fluffy musical anymore. Critics had to admit it, it was art. Every technical detail, every beat of editing, every soft piano note, and crisp footstep was noticed and honored. However, what people didn't notice, what they were never supposed to know, was the chaos behind one of the film's most romantic scenes. The gazebo scene disaster, the forbidden scene. The gazebo scene between Maria and Captain Von Trapp is one of the most beloved romantic moments in movie history. You know the one, soft moonlight, quiet music, a slow kiss as they finally confess their love. But what you don't know is this, the scene was a complete disaster to film. The problem? The lights. Specifically, the massive carbon arc lights used to simulate moonlight. These were industrial machines, bright, hot, and loud. Really loud. And not just any kind of loud. They made a noise that sounded exactly like a fart. A long, wet, flat raspberry. Every single time Christopher Plummer leaned in to kiss Julie Andrews, PPPPFFFTTTTTT. Over and over. Julie said they tried 20 times. But the moment they got close to each other's faces, the lights let out that same ridiculous sound. They couldn't stop laughing. Even the serious lines, Maria, I love you, got destroyed by giggles. The entire crew was helpless. Hours went by. Nothing worked. Eventually, director Robert Wise gave up. He scrapped the original plan. No more bright lighting. Instead, he decided to shoot the whole scene in silhouette. He placed Julie and Christopher in front of the glowing gazebo windows. That way, their faces were mostly hidden, and their laughter didn't show. It ended up looking even more romantic. That glowing, dreamy style? That wasn't on purpose. It was damage control. And the studio? They didn't want anyone to know. 20th Century Fox clamped down hard. Cast and crew were warned not to mention the noises, the laughter, or the failed takes. For years, fans believed the scene had gone off without a hitch. The truth only came out decades later, when Julie Andrews finally told the story on a talk show. She laughed, remembering it, it's very hard to be nose-to-nose doing a love scene and having these awful raspberries coming at you from below. But while the audience laughed, no one knew that Plummer himself was carrying a much heavier secret. Plummer's private misery. Christopher Plummer might have looked calm and collected on screen, but behind the scenes, he was deeply unhappy. He despised The Sound of Music. He called it gooey, mocked it as The Sound of Mucus, and even referred to it in interviews as just S&M. To him, the movie was overly sentimental, totally out of sync with the serious, challenging roles he wanted to play. And it showed. Plummer often isolated himself during filming in Salzburg. He once said the picturesque city felt more like a prison of sentimentality than a European getaway. Part of that was his own doing. He drank a lot and later admitted to gaining weight from all the rich food and alcohol. Still, he showed up. Always professional. Even when he was drunk, which he openly confessed to in later years. He said some scenes were filmed while he was 3 sheets to the wind, including one of the most emotional moments in the movie. But somehow, in the middle of all his resentment, Plummer gave a performance that would become iconic. The drunk scene that made everyone cry. There's a moment in the film that gets everyone emotional, when Captain Von Trapp sings Edelweiss with tears in his eyes during the festival. It feels so real, so heartfelt, but here's the twist, Christopher Plummer was completely drunk when they filmed it. He confessed in his 2008 memoir, In Spite of Myself, that he had been drinking heavily that day. He called himself a young and arrogant bastard who had no real connection to the film's sentimental tone. And yet, he managed to deliver a performance that moved millions. And that's the irony. The scene many fans point to as proof of his character's emotional transformation was carried by an actor who could barely stand straight. Hollywood magic at its finest, or its most bizarre. But that wasn't even the biggest blow to his pride. The voice that wasn't his. You know those scenes where Captain Von Trapp sings? Yeah, that's not Plummer singing. At least, not most of the time. Turns out, the high notes and extended vocal parts were performed by Bill Lee, a professional singer who also did vocals for Disney movies like Sleeping Beauty and Mary Poppins. Plummer's speaking voice was used for transitions and dialogue, but when the real singing kicked in, especially in Edelweiss, Lee took over. Plummer was furious. He felt the decision undermined his performance. But the producers didn't think he could pull off the vocal demands, and they weren't taking chances. Ironically, most fans never noticed. Lee's voice blended so seamlessly that people still believe they're hearing Plummer sing. By the time the movie came out, Plummer was so annoyed he could barely say the film's name without an eye roll. But decades later, he admitted the film had charmed him in the end. It just took a few decades, and a lot of time away from the spotlight, for him to see the impact it had on the world. And while Plummer was quietly battling his own demons, things on set were getting dangerously real for others too. The day little Gretel almost died. Filming in Salzburg wasn't just emotionally draining, it was physically dangerous. During the boat scene, where the Von Trapp children fall into the lake, 5-year-old Kim Carruth, who played little Gretel, nearly drowned. Here's what really happened. Just before shooting, the crew informed Julie Andrews that Kim couldn't swim. So the plan was for Andrews to fall toward the child when the boat tipped and grab her immediately. But when the boat flipped, everything went wrong. Andrews fell backward, away from Gretel. Kim slipped under the water twice before another actor jumped in to pull her out. She ended up vomiting from swallowing lake water and developed a fear of swimming that lasted for years. Even Julie Andrews was shaken. She later called the incident one of the scariest moments on set. But Gretel wasn't the only one who took a hit filming those now iconic scenes. The magical opening scene that slammed Julie Andrews into the ground. We all remember it, Julie Andrews, arms outstretched, twirling through a green alpine meadow as the camera soars above her. It looks peaceful, joyful, like something out of a dream. But here's what the audience didn't see. To get that sweeping aerial shot, a helicopter had to fly just 20 feet above her. Each time it circled around, the wind from the blades slammed Andrews flat into the grass. She was knocked over again and again, at least 6 or 7 times, and had to keep getting up, brushing off dirt, and smiling like nothing happened. She later joked in interviews that she was almost launched into Austria. The scene looked magical, but filming it felt like a full-body tackle from the sky. A beautiful disaster in Salzburg. Filming in Salzburg looked like a dream. Rolling hills, perfect meadows, fairy tale castles, it was the ideal setting for a musical. But behind the beauty was a nightmare. The original budget for the film was $8.2 million, already expensive for the mid-1960s. But no one warned the crew that Salzburg had some of the worst weather in Europe. 1964 turned out to be one of the wettest years on record. Director Robert Wise thought they could wrap up location shooting in 6 weeks. It ended up taking 11. Rain delays brought everything to a standstill. Over 250 cast and crew members sat around in soggy clothes, wasting time, and burning through the budget. The cost of hotel rooms, equipment repairs, extra meals, and rising wages made the studio executives sweat. Fox was already reeling from the disaster that was Cleopatra, and now this cheerful little musical was threatening to blow up just as badly. One studio insider even whispered, "This movie might be the end of us." But there was one more unexpected shakeup that made things even riskier. The director who walked away. Long before Robert Wise was hired, the legendary director William Wyler was supposed to lead The Sound of Music. In early 1963, he even quit his spot on Fox's board to avoid a conflict of interest. That's how serious it looked. But Wyler had doubts from the start. He didn't like the stage musical. He didn't feel connected to the script. Even when he flew to New York to see the Broadway show, he left confused. The songs didn't feel natural to him, they just didn't fit the story. He said there was something else too. Wyler was losing his hearing. It made directing a musical even harder. His wife could see it clearly, he just wasn't into it. So Wyler began quietly looking for a way out. He needed a clean break, something that wouldn't raise suspicion. That's when producers offered him The Collector, based on the John Fowles novel. Wyler read the script and instantly knew this was more his style, dark, twisted, psychological. He asked the Zanuck family, who were running the studio, to release him from his Sound of Music contract. The official story? Scheduling conflicts. That's what the press was told. That's what Fox repeated. But the truth was, Wyler ran the other way. And that left the door wide open for Robert Wise, who stepped in late 1963 to pick up the pieces. Thanks for watching, fam. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. Check out the next video that pops up on your screen.